Okay, Genesis 46 this week, and we'll probably get into 47 as well. That's the plan, at least, since a good chunk of 46 is I guess, genealogy or a record of the sons of Jacob. I don't know that I remember exactly where I was going with the lesson, to be honest, so we're just going to jump in, and if I need to give any background, we will. But some reading, I do remember I was going to read as we go this week, so the first 27 verses are on the docket. If anyone wants to read 27 verses with some names, please volunteer. Otherwise, I'll read for us. You want to, brother? Thanks. Yeah. Genesis 46, verse 1 through 29. Thank you, brother. Not too bad. Very good. Okay, so let's take a look at what we have in this first section here then. It seems like this genealogy almost interrupts our story for some reason. We've been going along in Jacob with the story of Joseph, and it's been grand and glorious, and then right in the middle we have this record of names, and maybe just because our tongues are not trained for the ancient language, it seems cumbersome and like an interruption. But of course, the big picture here is Jacob is leaving Canaan and going to Egypt, and with him, everything is also going. His sons, his livestock, his wealth, everything is going to Egypt. And we saw last week, of course, this was not done without first receiving from God some assurance. Not only are all his offspring and his livestock going to go, but most importantly, most notably, who goes with Jacob to Egypt? The Lord. God does. Jacob has the presence of the Lord with him. Of course, I couldn't have a lesson without a lengthy and wordy quote from Candlish, so I guess I'll just read this one. But it's helpful to think about the land of Canaan as Jacob leaves. What is left behind? Because the next time the narrative is going to be coming to Canaan, it's a wicked people, and God is overthrowing them, and they are dispossessing the nations. And so Candlish just comments. It says, and now Canaan has no longer within its borders the leaven of God's chosen seed, but is left to its old inhabitants, until their iniquities shall be full, not a foot of the soil beyond a sepulchre, the sepulchre which Abraham bought from the sons of Heth. For the well which they got by a treaty of Abimelech and Beersheba, and the parcel of ground which Jacob bought, were both of them uncertain possessions at this time, and need not be taken into account, save the sepulchre. Then not an inch of the territory belonged to the departing family. And that's just an interesting note to reflect on as well, that here the family, after 3 generations, leaves the promised land, not having received a foot's length in it. The only thing that they have is what they purchased with their own money, and it was the sepulchre of Abraham. Now Canaan is left to its old wicked ways until, of course, God brings the nation back. Okay, so then we read this list of names, and really the most significant thing I think here is the number at the end, interestingly enough. So we can take a look at each person and kind of where they appear in Scripture, but the number that was listed at the end, does anyone recall or see what number that was? Total, 70. Now, I guess I can ask this now. It will come up a little bit later as well, but does anyone remember why 70 is significant? We've seen a list of 70 names before in Genesis. Yeah, just the number, right. And we get that from, so the number is, or the table of nations is what Garrett said, and yes, completeness, the 2. And so we'll see why that's significant in a little bit. But God brought Noah through the flood, and then there was a list of 70. And now God is bringing Jacob out of the promised land into Egypt, and there's a list of 70 here. So hold that thought, though. Let's deal a little bit with just a couple things in the list of sons. This is not exactly my most favorite thing to talk about because I'm not a historian, and some of the stuff is not super fun, but I think it brought up a few questions. So there's a few weird things about the way this list runs. I don't know if anything stood out to anyone. Did anyone notice some perplexing things? Maybe most noticeable at first, if you're not paying attention, would just be Benjamin. So Benjamin is listed with 10 sons, and all throughout the narrative so far, Benjamin has been referred to as the boy. So that seems a little bit odd, and that's not, it could be that he's called a boy in his late 30s with 10 sons. It's possible. But also, and maybe this is even more of an interesting point, so Perez is listed as one of the sons of Judah. So Judah has Er, Onan, Shelah, and Perez, and then Perez has Hezron and Hamuel. So this is Judah's son through Tamar, whose son now has 2 sons. So these are grandsons of Judah. And that is interesting because if you start piecing together the time frame, the age difference between Joseph and Judah, and remember, this is sons that Judah had through Tamar, which means Judah already had a previous marriage. And with that marriage, 2 of the sons were grown to maturity. God killed them, and the third one was grown to maturity and not given to Tamar, and so then Tamar went and did what she did with Judah, and so that all takes time for those things to happen. So if you're interested in kind of digging into that, Keel and Delitzsch kind of put this argument together, and then I just had it put together in a graphic. So your last page, I'm not really going to talk about it, but you can look at it, and on the back side, there's a bit of a timeline there, all the way on the very back. That just shows how piecing some of these years together, it seems like the earliest possible, or the the oldest possible age that Perez would be at the time that they came to Egypt would be about 11 years old, which is not old enough to have two sons yet. So the question is kind of, well, what's going on here as we talk about this 70? There's two options. Okay, one is none of these dates are super fixed, so there is still some way that you could read all this narrative and have all of them being born and being brought into Egypt. It seems difficult and seems like you have to stretch some things. I think the more likely scenario is that these names are recorded as the names of the heads of families, as we'll see later, because the 70 appears later next, not the same 70, but sorry. The heads of families of the tribes are listed here. And so the names are given as the names of those people, which are counted as coming from Canaan to Egypt, even though some of them were not born until they are in Egypt. In the same way that we talk, ancient writers would talk about, how do they say? Oh, Melchizedek paid tithes to Abraham to Christ while he was yet in the loins of his father. There's some idea that these people are all going from Canaan to Egypt while yet in the loins of their father, perhaps. That's one way to take it as well. But just interesting to note that as we list this table, the author is intending to emphasize something through the significance of the number 70. That's what he's kind of driving at. This is pieced together. Dana is included in there, but not necessarily all of the daughters that we know of. But this list of 70 is counted for a reason. Okay, what is that reason? And that reason really, as Ralph said, in terms of wholeness, or as Garrett pointed out, the table of nations, this is really just saying that this is God's new people. This is a mark that Jacob has now become the beginning of a nation. And this beginning of God's new nation the beginning of God's new humanity is pictured here as God has begun to fulfill what he promised to Abraham. And that's what's at least being emphasized by the literature here. So we saw 70 nations listed earlier, and now we see the whole of God's new nation by their heads of families listed here in chapter 46. So that brings us through 1.4. Any just thoughts or questions on that? Like I said, you can dig into that if you're interested, but I thought rather than skip over it, I'll just bring it out. Okay, I'd like to read the next section. I think 1.5 was actually supposed to be 2.1, so you can draw an arrow down there. But let's read starting in verse 28 and through the end of the chapter now. Anyone want to read a shorter section? I'll go ahead and read. Now he sent Judah before him to Joseph to point out the way before him to Goshen. And they came into the land of Goshen. Joseph prepared his chariot and went up to Goshen to meet his father Israel. As soon as he appeared before him, he fell on his neck and wept on his neck a long time. Then Israel said to Joseph, "Now let me die, since I have seen your face, that you are still alive." Joseph said to his brothers and to his father's household, "I will go up and tell Pharaoh, and I will say to him, 'My brothers and my father's household, who were in the land of Canaan, have come to me. And the men were shepherds, for they have been keepers of livestock, and they have brought their flocks and their herds and all that they have.' When Pharaoh calls you and says, 'What is your occupation?' you shall say, 'Your servants have been keepers of livestock from our youth, even until now, both we and our fathers, that you may live in the land of Goshen, for every shepherd is loathsome to the Egyptians.'" Let's see. Do I want to keep reading? I do. I put the wrong numbers in here. I'm sorry. I want to read to verse 19 in the next chapter as well. Then Joseph went in and told Pharaoh and said, "My father and my brothers and their flocks and their herds and all that they have come out of the land of Canaan, and behold, they are in the land of Goshen." He took 5 men from among his brothers and presented them to Pharaoh. Then Pharaoh said to his brothers, "What is your occupation?" So they said to Pharaoh, "Your servants are shepherds, both we and our fathers." And they said to Pharaoh, "We have come to sojourn in the land, for there is no pasture for our servants' flocks, for the famine is severe in the land of Canaan. Now therefore, please let your servants live in the land of Goshen." Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Your father and your brothers have come to you. The land of Egypt is at your disposal. Settle your father and your brothers in the land of in the best of the land. Let them live in the land of Goshen. And if you know of any capable men among them, then put them in charge of my livestock." Then Joseph brought his father Jacob and presented him to Pharaoh. And Jacob blessed Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said to Jacob, "How many years have you lived?" So Jacob said to Pharaoh, "The years of my sojourning are 130. Few and unpleasant have been the years of my life, nor have they attained to the years that my fathers lived during the days of their sojourning." And Jacob blessed Pharaoh and went out from his presence. So Joseph settled his father and his brothers and gave them a possession in the land of Egypt, in the best of the land, in the land of Ramses, as Pharaoh had ordered. Joseph provided his father and his brothers and all his father's household with food according to their little ones. And we're going to stop right there in verse 12. So that brings us now to the settling of Joseph's family, their reunion and resettling or settling in Egypt. So the first thing we noticed, again, and this is not something new, but Jacob sends Judah on ahead of the family. So this indicates that, well, if you're going to pick someone to send them on ahead, Jacob apparently trusts Judah now. So Judah has earned his father's trust, and this just reemphasizes what we've already seen, that Judah is a changed man, a leader of his father's people. Then when Jacob and Joseph meet, they each have their reciprocal responses. Joseph is again doing what? It seems like Joseph is always doing this in these few chapters. Joseph falls on Jacob's neck and he's weeping, he's crying. Jacob, in return, how would you characterize his response? I picked a word, but it doesn't have to be this word, yeah. 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 Right. Yeah, I put satisfied. Yep, complete. Yes, this would be fine. So Joseph is weeping, Jacob is satisfied. So just a note on Joseph here that I thought was interesting. Over and over, we've seen that the trials and hardship of Joseph's young life have not left him a hardened or callous man. He's still tender-hearted and thankful for God's mysterious hand. What a goal to aspire to, right? That though God brings severe afflictions upon us, we still have the joy and the capacity to weep if God is in seeing what God is doing, right? Sometimes we have the tendency to let difficult things just turn us into stoics and unfeeling people, but we need to learn to still rejoice at what God does and weep with those who weep. And
you see the opposite in his father, probably.
Yeah.
You see the harmony and bitterness, not all the time, but
Right. Yeah. And I mean, Joseph is a younger man still, and Jacob has seen a lot in his time, and so maybe there's some that goes with that as well. Jacob's words, he says, "Now let me die, since I've seen your face and know that you are still alive." This reminded me of something. Maybe it reminds you of something similar. To finally meet one before you die and to speak a word of God's faithfulness. Does that bring anyone to mind? Someone in the New Testament I'm thinking of. I think I heard it, yeah. Yeah, Simeon. Yeah, Simeon says something very similar, right? "Now you let your servant depart in peace, for my eyes have... You are letting your servant depart in peace, according to your word, for my eyes have seen your salvation that you have prepared in the presence of all people, a light for revelation to the Gentiles and for glory to your people, Israel. It's just a similarity in expression as these older men who have waited long. I think Simeon probably with eager faith, Jacob perhaps with timid or hard-pressed faith. But even so, when they see the first glimpses of God's promise being fulfilled, it satisfies them. It fills them with a rest that their days are not wasted utterly, but God's promises are sure. So, with that then, we think of now the task in front of Joseph and Jacob and his brothers and the 70 is now they have to settle in a land of the land of Egypt again, but this is now a land which is populated. It's under the rule of the king, and there probably was some uncertainty under those circumstances. How was this people to remain a separate people now if they are living in the land of Egypt? And certainly this would have been, at least at first, they're brought into the presence of Joseph and of Pharaoh, so they're coming into a populated place. But again, God is going to make provision for them in this peculiar way. And so we'll see provision through the wisdom of Joseph. Those are the two blanks there in 2:3. Not only will, so his plan is to tell Pharaoh that they are herders of sheep. So not only will he tell Pharaoh that his father and his brothers have arrived, but he will not neglect to mention that they are keepers of livestock. His brothers will say the same when they stand before Pharaoh. And since shepherds are an abomination to the Egyptians, Pharaoh will give them the rich pasture lands of Goshen, that they may continue their way of life, separated from the major population and yet provided for in the fertile land. They will be in Egypt, but not of Egypt. And I think this is fascinating as well, as God brings his people into this land, but uses this peculiar thing that to them, shepherds or those who keep livestock are hated by them, and yet God uses that to keep them separate in the foreign land. Yeah.
Is that because of what sheep do to the land?
I don't know. So I did not see any consensus around why this is. Perhaps,
I know
yeah.
people do not like sheep because they think it has to be
Yeah. So,
keep and raise.
mm-hmm.
I think it was keepers of livestock in general were thought of as dirty scoundrels, rough and tumble, not fit for society. They were not allowed to be a witness in a court of law because they were outcast, dirty, cowboys.
Is that personal experience?
That's helpful. Yeah, so God provides for them in this manner as well as they come to settle. Pharaoh, of course, agrees. He grants them the best of the land. Not only this, but some of them are going to become keepers of Pharaoh's livestock, which makes them shepherds of the king's sheep, interestingly enough. And as Jacob, remember, so as Jacob was to Laban's flock and Isaac and Abraham, so now the sons of Jacob. Just the continuity of their profession as tenders of livestock, keepers of sheep, even as God is giving them food in a land which could certainly be a threat to them. We remember Lot, as he moved closer and closer to Sodom and Gomorrah, he essentially, his family has at least lost their faith, even though Lot is still recorded as having faith in the New Testament. So also you would think this is a challenge, but God provides for them. And so now Jacob stands before Pharaoh, and this is kind of that interesting point here that Jacob stands before him. And I always thought of this as Jacob, again, this wilderness wandering man comes and stands before the king of Egypt. And the king's question is essentially, how old are you? Like, this guy must look pretty aged. And I just love Jacob's reply here, right? Few and I think Nasby says, unpleasant. Few and evil have been the days of my youth, and they have not attained to the days of my fathers. And I just think when we think of this, we think of how does a man speak of few and evil at the end of his days? Well, certainly few compared to eternity for which man was created, and evil with regards to the uprightness of God's original creation and the righteousness that he requires. I think if we all, with a true heart, look back at our days, we say few because God has put eternity in our hearts, and we say evil because truly we are corrupt. So it's a very humble reply, even if Jacob seems to persist somewhat in his doldrums here. It depends what tone you read that with. But the conclusion to this portion is that God has brought the family safely to Egypt, and they have settled now. Joseph provides each one according to their need. So that's sort of the conclusion, really, of Jacob's life. We have the last part, which is going to be the blessing of Jacob. But Jacob's not going to leave Egypt. Jacob's going to die here. Joseph will close his eyes. This is the conclusion of God providing for them through the famine. So really what we have left in this last little section is just to wrap up the topic of the famine in general as it applied to the world and Joseph's rule, because as Jacob and his family come in, there are still 5 more years left of famine. So we have just a couple minutes left, but I don't think this will take very long. Would someone like to read for me verses, I think it was 13 through 19, something like that?
Sure. Now there was no food in the land because the famine was very severe, so that the land of Egypt and the land of Canaan languished because of the famine. Joseph gathered all the money that was found in the land of Egypt and in the land of Canaan for the grain which they bought. And Joseph brought the money into Pharaoh's house. When the money was all spent in the land of Egypt and in the land of Canaan, all the Egyptians came to Joseph and said, "Give us food, for why should we die in your presence? For our money is gone." Then Joseph said, "Give up your livestock, and I will give you food for your livestock, since your money is gone." So they brought their livestock to Joseph, and Joseph gave them food in exchange for their horses and their flocks and their herds and the donkeys. And he fed them with food in exchange for all their livestock that year. When that year was ended, they came to him the next year and said to him, "We will not hide from my lord that our money is all spent, and the cattle are my lord's. There is nothing left for the Lord except our bodies and our lands. Why should we die before your eyes, both we and our land? Buy us and our land for food, and we and our land will be slaves to Pharaoh. So give us seed, that we may live and not die, and that the land may not be desolate."
Thank you. Can you read through 27, actually? That will finish us up.
So Joseph bought all the land of Egypt for Pharaoh, for every Egyptian sold his field, because the famine was so severe upon them. Thus the land became Pharaoh's. As for the people, he removed them from the cities, from one end of Egypt's border to the other. Only the land of the priests he did not buy, for the priests had an allotment from Pharaoh, and they lived off the allotment which Pharaoh gave them. Therefore they did not sell their land. Then Joseph said to the people, "Behold, I have today bought you and your land for Pharaoh. Now here is seed for you, and you may sow the land. At the harvest you shall give a fifth to Pharaoh, and 4/5 shall be your own for seed of the field, and for your food, and for those of your household, and as food for your little ones." So they said, "You have saved our lives. Let us find favor in the sight of my lord, and we will be Pharaoh's slaves." Joseph made it a statute concerning the land of Egypt, valid to this day, that Pharaoh should have the fifth. Only the land of the priest did not become Pharaoh's. Now Israel lived in the land of Egypt in Goshen, and they acquired property in it and were fruitful and became very numerous. Jacob lived in the land of Egypt 17 years, so that the length of Jacob's life was 147 years.
Thank you. Yep. That's good for right there. Yep. So we're going to pause there. I'm looking at the time and thinking I probably am not actually going to be able to cover all of it. So next week we'll return and kind of wrap up with Joseph, and then we'll speak of the death of Jacob, and then we'll save sort of the prophecies to deal with in the coming weeks. But now we've read it, and so we can go and return and look at it. Think of it, I'll just comment on the highlight, and you have your handout. But I think the big emphasis that we'll see when we go through this is here we have Israel, who is going to prosper under Joseph's rule, and we have Egypt. Now, the Egyptians are certainly thankful that Joseph has saved their life, but even as Israel is there with some freedom and some gift of land, Egypt, on the other hand, is selling their land and selling their livestock and being, as it were, plundered by the famine. And so you have this sort of this reversal, but it's going to set up the jealousy and the frustration that will ultimately enslave them for the next 400 years. And of course, God is working for the great exodus that he will bring the people out of. But any thoughts or comments, I guess, just on the conclusion of Joseph's story generally? We'll touch on this briefly next week, but yeah, kind of just the winding down of what we've already seen. So I'm sure there's much there, but it's also putting a period at the end of the things that we've already seen. So, okay. Well, let's pray. Lord, thank you for your light that comes through Genesis 46 and into 47. We remember your faithfulness to your people, and we see the way that you work so sovereignly in history, how the promises that you first made in the garden after the fall, and then again to Abraham and to Isaac, and now to Jacob, even as they are in the story many thousands of years before Christ comes, still we've seen such bright glimmers of what the promised one will do for his people and how you will save your people, that even as we read it, our hearts see the testimony of the one divine author and the consistency of your book and your word. And we revel in how you have worked so mightily in the past to redeem your people. And it fills us with faith to see that you are able to sway the hearts of rulers and the weather and the world and livestock, and you are able to use famines and jealousy amongst siblings and all things for your glory. You are able to use all things that happen for the good of those who love you, who are called according to your purpose. And so we thank you for this, and ask that you would keep us holding fast to your word and loving you, Lord, I pray in your name. Amen.